The employee left 8 months ago. Professionally, a box of personal items carried out to the car park on a Thursday afternoon. HR updated their record. Payroll stopped. The laptop was returned to IT. The keycard was not collected. Not because of negligence exactly, there was a process. The process said facilities management would deactivate the card within 5 business days of the departure date. Facilities management received the notification. It went into a queue. The queue was long that month. The card stayed active. 8 months later, it is still active. The former employee still has it. They used it that Tuesday night, not maliciously, in this case, just to retrieve something they had forgotten in the car park. Using the entrance they had used every day for 3 years, without thinking about whether they still should. But here is the scenario that matters. The card was not in their possession. It was in someone else's. Found in a jacket, borrowed, sold, taken without the original owner knowing. The access log shows a scan. The door opens. The system records it as valid because it is valid. There is no anomaly to detect. The identity has not been compromised. It has simply not been revoked. It is still there, still working, still trusted, for an entity that the organization has not employed for 8 months. This is stale identity. Not an attack. Not a vulnerability in any conventional sense. Just access that outlived the reason for it and a system with no way to know the difference. Identity systems are good at creation. They are structurally weak at expiry. When a user joins an organization, provisioning happens because something triggers it. An HR record is created, an IT request is submitted, an account is needed to do the job. The event, arrival, is visible, immediate, and actionable. Systems are designed around it. When a user's access should change, because they moved to a different team, because their role evolved, because they left, the trigger is much softer. Sometimes there is an offboarding process that catches it. Sometimes there is not. Sometimes there is a process that works for the primary systems and misses the secondary ones. Sometimes the process works perfectly for the account the payroll manages and completely ignores the 12 service accounts, 3 shared mailboxes, and 2 external collaboration spaces that accumulated over 3 years. The deeper structural issue is that identity systems model what was provisioned, not what is currently warranted. A permission granted in January is still recorded as granted in December, whether the reason for it still exists or not. There is no field in most identity records that says this access is predicated on this role and should be automatically reviewed if that role changes. The access accumulates. The record grows. The gap between what the identity represents and what the real-world subject is entitled to widens silently over time. And unlike most security vulnerabilities, stale identity does not announce itself. There is no failed authentication. There is no anomalous traffic. There is no error log. There is just an access right that nobody has looked at recently, held by someone who no longer needs it. Or, in the worst case, by no one in particular, because the person it belonged to stopped working there months ago. The most obvious form of stale identity is the account that belongs to someone who no longer works at the organization. The average enterprise takes between 1 and 7 days to fully disable a departed employee's access after their last day, and that is the average for accounts in the primary identity provider. For accounts in downstream systems, SaaS applications, and external collaboration tools, the figure is much longer. In many cases, it is indefinite. The access that matters is rarely the primary account. A former employee whose Active Directory account is disabled within 24 hours of departure may still have active accounts in the project management tool, the cloud data platform, the code repository, the customer support system, and the shared document workspace, each provisioned separately, each requiring a separate deprovisioning action, each dependent on someone knowing the account exists. The practical consequence is that departing employees routinely leave behind a trail of active access that persists for weeks, months, or permanently. Some of it is forgotten. Some of it is deliberate. The employee retains access to a system nobody thought to revoke because they were the only person who understood it, and disabling their access would break something. In both cases, the identity remains active long after the entitlement to it has expired. The second category is more insidious because it involves people who are still actively employed and whose access looks entirely legitimate because it was granted legitimately at various points in the past. Access accumulation happens when access is added as roles change, but rarely removed as the old role is left behind. An employee joins the finance team. They are given access to the finance systems. 2 years later, they move to the product team. They are given access to the product systems. The finance access is not removed because removing it requires someone to actively decide to remove it, and nobody thinks to do so at the moment of the role change. 3 years after that, the employee moves again. They now have access to finance systems they have not used in 5 years, product systems they used 2 years ago, and their current team's systems. Each individual access grant was appropriate when it was made. The combination, today, is dramatically broader than any single role requires. This is sometimes called permission creep, and it produces identities that are technically current. The person works here. The account is active, that represent an entitlement set that has long since become disconnected from the person's actual function. The identity is not stale in the sense of belonging to a ghost. It is stale in the sense that most of what it represents was accurate 3 jobs ago. The third category belongs entirely to non-human identities, and it compounds the problems of machine credential management in a specific way. Service accounts are created for a purpose, to let one system do a specific thing. When the purpose ends, the account rarely follows. The microservice is deprecated. The integration is replaced. The script stops running. The service account stays provisioned in the identity system, holding whatever permissions it accumulated during its active life, authenticating to nothing, owned by nobody. Dormant service accounts are particularly attractive targets for attackers with access to an environment for 3 reasons. They are over-provisioned relative to their current need, which is 0, but their historical need may have been substantial. They are unmonitored. Nobody is watching for activity on an account that is not supposed to be doing anything. And they are ownerless. There is no individual who will notice unusual activity and raise a flag because there is no individual whose job it is to notice. An attacker who finds a dormant service account with database write access, cloud API permissions, or the ability to create new user accounts has found something more useful than most active credentials because using it generates no anomaly relative to a baseline that no longer exists. The fourth category is accounts that were never tied to a specific individual to begin with. Shared accounts, where multiple people use the same credential, are common in operational environments, in small teams, in legacy systems that predate individual identity management, and in situations where someone needed quick access, and creating individual accounts was considered too slow. A shared account does not become stale in the way an individual account does. It does not belong to a specific person who can leave. But it becomes stale in a different way. The set of people who know its credentials expands over time and almost never contracts. The password is shared with a new team member. Another team member joins. The password is shared again. After a few years, a shared account's credentials may be known to a dozen or more former employees, contractors, and vendors, none of whom have any current entitlement to the access it provides. The account is active. The credentials are valid. The people who hold those credentials are scattered across organizations and tenure histories that nobody is tracking. The audit trail for a shared account is worthless as an attribution mechanism. Every action is attributed to the account, not the individual who took it. In a post-incident investigation, a shared account is an evidentiary black hole. Stale identities are not attacked in the way most threats are. They are not targeted based on who they belong to. They are discovered and opportunistically used. During reconnaissance in a compromised environment, one of the most reliable techniques is simply enumerating accounts and looking for ones that have not authenticated recently. An account that last logged in 14 months ago is almost certainly not actively monitored. If it still has valid credentials, it is a candidate for use, either through credential stuffing, if the password is known from a breach, or through direct exploitation of any weakness in the account's configuration. Stale accounts also cluster in specific places. Acquired companies often have incompletely integrated identity environments, where departing employees from the pre-acquisition period were deprovisioned in one system but not another. Large organizations that run multiple identity providers have gaps in offboarding coverage at the seams between systems. Legacy applications that were excluded from the main identity infrastructure because integration was too complex have their own user populations that the central team has no visibility into. An attacker who understands these structural gaps, and they are not subtle, they appear in almost every environment of moderate complexity, can predict where stale accounts are likely to accumulate before they have enumerated anything at all. The attack is systematic rather than sophisticated. The sophistication is in knowing where to look, not in what is done once the account is found. Addressing stale identity is not a project, it is a practice, and the distinction matters because organizations consistently approach it as the former. A one-time access review cleans up what currently exists. It does not prevent the next round of accumulation. 12 months after a comprehensive access audit, an environment without continuous review processes will have rebuilt a comparable backlog of stale access through the ordinary operations of hiring, role changes, project assignments, and departures. The access certification process, periodic reviews where managers attest to whether their team members' access is still appropriate, is the most common approach. It works tolerably well for human accounts in well-managed directories. It works poorly for service accounts which have no manager in any meaningful sense. It works not at all for shared accounts which have no individual owner. And it works only as well as the quality of the information provided to reviewers. A manager who is shown a list of access rights without context about when they were granted or whether they have been used recently is poorly positioned to make a good decision. The most effective approaches combine three things: automated detection of accounts that have not authenticated within a defined window, flagging them for review rather than waiting for a scheduled audit cycle, access tied to a defined purpose and duration at the time of provisioning, so that access naturally expires unless it is actively renewed, and offboarding processes that are comprehensive enough to cover not just the primary identity provider, but every downstream system where the departing person or retiring service had an account. None of these are technically difficult. All of them require sustained organizational attention, and sustained attention is the resource that stale identity consistently outlasts. Every active identity in a system represents an assumption that the entity it was created for still has a legitimate reason to have it. Stale identity is what accumulates when that assumption is never re-examined. Not through any attack, not through any exploitation, simply through the passage of time and the ordinary operations of an organization that is better at adding access than removing it. The threat is not dramatic. Nobody broke in. No cryptography was defeated. A door that should have been closed years ago was still open, and that is a security posture, not a security incident. Until it becomes one,